Hello everyone, Literal Fair, and welcome to the League Start episode for the Heist in 3.12 Challenge League. Before we get into it, one quick announcement. I've been hired as a guide writer for Icy Veins' Path of Exile branch. Aside from this leading to me releasing more written build guides, it also grants me a better platform to post the written chaos reports to, thanks to superior formatting, embeds, and other features that just don't exist over on Reddit. As a result, you'll now find the text version release of the chaos report over on the Poe-Vault website, which I'll link to in the description down below, of course. For everyone that prefers the Reddit posts, don't be afraid, those will still continue as their half-week update, at least until the overall interest in them dies down, of course. Thank you for the continued support and love. Without all of you, I doubt I would have had the opportunity for this to happen in the first place, so thank you very much. For viewers that prefer an audio-only version of the Chaos Report, you'll be able to find it immediately over on my Patreon, as per usual. Of course, that one remains a free option. One additional quick reminder, you can also find the timestamps to each section in the pinned comment down below, and also on the timeline for the video itself, so just hover over that. Do keep in mind that this entire video is based on educated guesses or predictions, and as such, they might not be entirely accurate. Furthermore, I might miss a thing or two that seem obvious to many, and for that I apologize. It's hard to cover everything. If I do miss something that you think is important, leave it in the comments down below. And what that means, of course, is invest at your own risk. And with the usual disclaimer out of the way, let's finally jump right in. The first segment breaks down currencies and commodities such as influence, exalted orbs, and fragments. I'll be giving my rough predictions for how the existing currencies will play out during the first few weeks and over the course of the league in general in this episode. Exalted orbs are, of course, first, as always. The OG Exalted Orb has seen one of its most steady pricings in any league to date during Harvest. There are a couple of reasons for this might be the case. Firstly, due to the overabundance of mid to high level crafting, we've seen a vastly increased amount of Exalted Orbs being taken out of the economy by the crafting bench, mostly used for meta crafts or the odd tier 1 quality or otherwise unobtainable crafts from Harvest. Secondly, while the addition of Harvest's free slam mechanic, even leading so far as to offer free targeted slams, has reduced the amount of Exalted slams used by players, this is actually not a large dent in the overall supply. While a lot of players might think that Exalt slams are a prime reason for Exalts to leave the economy, it is actually a far less common reason than the previously mentioned crafting costs, from my personal experience. As a result, this theoretical increase in supply does not mitigate the extreme rise in the demand for them. Lastly, and most importantly, Harvest's league mechanic has not provided any additional loot to players. That is comparable with previous leagues. While the rewards were oftentimes better than in previous leagues, that actual amount of physical currency dropped by the mechanic itself was fairly low. Thusly, with a vastly increased demand for crafting and the drastically lowered supply, we end up with Exalted Orbs being expensive throughout the entire league, with no real dips and dives. Of course, there is also the problem of botting in the economy, but I would argue that there wasn't much of a difference to previous leagues, when comparing the overall devaluing of chaos. Most items that are unrelated to crafting directly and didn't get hit by any particular nerfs did not shoot up in their equivalent chaos price as they should have, if there had been a vast influx of chaos specifically, when looking at the data from previous leagues. As a result, with no further evidence to go off of, as we can't look at any correlating data directly, of course, because only GGG has access to those, and as such don't have any concrete proof, I would conclude that there's been no more tampering of the economy by botters than is usual, so I would attribute that mostly to the league mechanic itself. Now, getting to talk about Heist, I would predict Exalted Orbs to have a more turbulent life throughout the league compared to Harvest, with potentially more Exalted Orbs dropping as a result of the Vault access in the Heist mechanic, and the removal of everything Harvest craft related lowering their demand. It will be a lot harder for their prices to remain stable, as the meta advances and a result supply or demand diminishes or increases based on what happens. However, as always, a warning. A large portion of the Exalted market is owned by a very small percentage of the player base. The majority of the prices will be able to be influenced by them fairly easily. As a result, a lot of the predictions here may or may not be entirely accurate, depending on that particular player base's whim, which is kind of upsetting, but what are you going to do about it? Take it as a rough guideline and make sure to stock up on Exalted Orbs as early as possible in the league, as they are always more expensive than the first 2 to 4 days later on. As always, make sure to check these prices hourly, as Exalted Orbs are a prime trading and stocking target very early on in the league. If you drop an Exalted Orb early on, hold on to it, unless you know what you're doing with it. Each day you hold on to it will usually increase their value of it by 20 to 30 chaos for the first entire week. So unless you can make more currency than that as a direct result of converting the Exalted Orb into Chaos and powering yourself up, let it passively accrue value instead. As for the Influence Exalted Orbs and the Awakener Orb, let's take a quick look at them. The Hunter's Exalted Orb is usually one of these early on. During the first month, it usually reaches its peak and stays around there until it drops off hard around the 20 to 30 day mark. This results in a continuous downwards trend towards the rest of the league, with some sudden upticks due to types of the build meta changing or anything like that. Last league, the maximum price was around 600 chaos, but it sank down to an average of around 190 chaos for the remainder of the league past the first month. With Harvest not going core, we will likely see the return of a slightly increased price for all the Influence Exalted Orbs by about 100 to 150 chaos. As a result, don't invest into these early, unless absolutely necessary for your build to survive. You will almost always get a better deal about 1 or 2 weeks down the line. And as such, try to make the Hunter Influence Orbs your last upgrade, in order to save yourself a decent chunk of currency. The Awakener Orb has seen its highest price point since its inception during the last league. This is due to their power of creating double influence crafting bases, and the fact that Harvest made it incredibly easy and efficient to continue crafting a great item after the combination. The highest regular pricing reached around 680 chaos 2 to 3 weeks into Harvest. It is extremely unlikely that we will see such high prices again for Heist, as the Harvest crafting mechanics are no longer available, making the use of an Awakener Orb more of a gamble than a natural step in the player's crafting endeavors as they were last league. I would imagine prices roughly similar to the Delirium League prices, which were hovering at an average of about 370 to 430 chaos roughly, while the Heists might take a chunk out of the supply for the orb due to many players likely not being able to reach the higher level Cirrus boss fights as they're spending too much time in their heists. It will likely be counterbalanced by the large portion of the player base returning to their non-crafting ways, comparatively to Harvest, drastically lowering the demand as well. If you acquire one early on, consider holding onto it for a few days for the economy to catch up, or use it early to craft some nice items to potentially cash in on the early bird bonus of item crafting. The economy for this orb usually reaches its early league peak around the 1 to 2 week mark, so consider selling them around that time. It's usually the best timing. If you require a rundown on how the Awakener Orb mechanics function, feel free to check out the Metamorph Week 3 episode of the Chaos Report. I cover the crafting mechanics of the orb in a fairly in-depth manner, and also link to the further reading and video material in the description of that video. All the information should still be pretty accurate to this day, because the mechanics haven't really seen any changes, so feel free to check that out. The Crusader's Exalted Orb will likely see a similar curve to the Hunter's one. Due to its solid mod pool, this is historically the most stable orb out of any of the Exalted Orbs in the entire game. It held itself around the 150 to 160 chaos mark pretty much throughout the entire last league, bearing the typical drop past the 2-month mark and the super early league peak, of course. As a result, expect to get a rough idea for the overall pricing of this one about 1 to 2 weeks into the league. After that point, it usually only fluctuates a tiny bit, like about 20 chaos up or down per week. This orb is a solid choice to build your gear around, as you can normally acquire it for a decent price fairly early on, so don't be afraid to consider it for your league starter build. The Warlock's Exalted Orb, on the other hand, is pretty much exactly the opposite of the Crusader's Orb in most leagues. It sees large rises and falls throughout the leagues, often starting at an abhorrently pricey floor, sticking around it for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then falling extremely hard, even below the Redeemer's Orb in value sometimes, around the end of the league. It is very likely caused by the mod pool being extremely good for early league builds, and being rather poor for builds later on. I'm expecting the Warlord and Crusader orbs to see a slightly increased popularity due to the newly added fire and lightning based abilities synergizing well with the mods offered by the specific influences the orbs provide. For this league, expect a similar price graph to the Hunter's Exalted Orb, unless there's a reason to believe otherwise. Keep an eye on the popular content creators and their league starter guides to determine whether or not we can expect to see a ton of fire or lightning based builds. If there are, expect these orbs to go up. And lastly, the Redeemer. The Redeemer orb is always the cheapest of the influence orbs, as its influence mod pool is just honestly garbage. It has seen its lowest price point ever, even dropping below the 100 chaos mark and getting close to the 50 chaos mark for a majority of the league. Its average price for Harvest was around 82 to 88 chaos, with a mean value of around 75. While it is fairly unlikely we'll see prices that low again in Heist, it is very much expected that the Redeemer Orb will continue to be the cheapest out of all the Exalted Orbs, potentially including the OG. During the first week or two, it usually has a fairly high price compared to later in the league, as the supply is just very low at the start, so try to avoid buying them early on, unless there's absolutely no way around it for your build. If you get one early, hold on to it for a day or two at most, see how the prices develop, but honestly, historically, there's never really been a rise past the 10 to 12 day mark, so just get rid of them before then. As always, if you intend on buying any of these orbs just covered, please make sure to keep an eye on this extremely volatile market space and don't come in here and tell me in the comments that, hey, this item was not actually at the price when you said it was. Everything changes very quickly, so I would appreciate that. Thank you. All duration orbs have seen their highest prices ever in Harvest and will likely be fairly expensive again in this one. With the focus being placed heavily on crafting in the last league, we saw the alteration orbs reach crazy high prices of above 3 to 1 chaos. While we're not likely to see a similarly high price this time around, I think it's time to acknowledge the alteration orb as a new currency among the alchemy orb tier. With cluster jewels still being an integral part to many a build, and the notables getting a substantial nerf during Harvest League, we'll also see a huge amount of alteration orbs being used to create the necessary jewel structures for the builds, further increasing the demand for them throughout this next league. We will very likely see an increase in supply for them as well, however, as the Heist League mechanic seems to drop a ton of rare items, especially comparing it to Harvest, leading to more players initially picking up rares and selling them to vendors over the course of the league. I doubt this will outdo the demand, but it's something to keep in mind nevertheless. For the early league, it is always worthwhile to invest some of your currency into alteration orbs early, as most of the time you can still pick up like 10 to 20 alterations per chaos during the first week, or at least the first couple of days, before they drop down to 5 to 1 or even lower price point. Early bulking will likely be extremely worthwhile again this time around, if these predictions come to pass, which is highly likely. This, of course, means that if you're sitting on a ton of alteration orbs early, don't sell them. At least not for those prices. It's kind of stupid. For the commodities section, we'll be covering the different fragments pieces, including the simulacrum, as well as the synthesis and guardian map drops. Shaper fragments have been a fairly lucrative piece of the market in the past leagues, prior to Harvest, as Shaper runs were essentially free due to the high prices of overworlder fragments and some decent unique drops. However, ever since the significant nerfs to the last remaining items in the Shaper loot pool that were worth something, mainly the Starforge to be honest, their prices have been in the figurative dumpster. You might see the Dying Sun unique flask be fairly popular this league due to the projectile changes and the addition of a handful of new projectile based abilities, which might increase the prices slightly, but it is unlikely to cause a major spike, as it would be the only item worth anything in the entire pool. So as a result, Shaper fragments will likely be cheap to acquire, as the overall profit margin of running it is vastly diminished comparatively to previous leagues, outside of Harvest of course, by the loss of value from the unique items dropped by the fight itself. So, probably not worth a lot. The Uber fragments have seen fairly steady prices throughout the entire last league, as the Uber Elder uniques, especially 3-mile Watcher's Eyes, have seen a fairly high price throughout past leagues. A factor to this is that the obtaining Uber Elder fragments requires the Shaper boss fight to be completed at least twice. As such, each fragment has a certain minimum value that is dependent on the Shaper fragment values multiplied by a certain factor of potential tries required to get the given fragment in the first place. The prices started at around 110 chaos last league, teetering off towards the end of the second and third week towards its 75 to 85 chaos price point for the remainder of the league. My advice would be to run your Uber Elders early to get some of the high value and unique items from the fight before the market gets saturated with them. Once there's a lot of them, it's oftentimes more valuable to just sell the fragments, but we'll take a look at that exact situation next week, as per usual. The Elder fragments themselves were fairly cheap throughout the entire last 2 leagues, and will likely remain to be. The Elder boss fight does not really drop any unique items that are still high in demand, and as such the prices are simply not going to be very high. Additionally, most of the fragments are very easy to acquire from the abundance of Elder influence maps granted by Zana, and as a result, cannot really be short in supply once people reach the mid to high tier mapping stage of their characters. We could potentially see a slight shortage of supply, due to the Heist not being maps, and as such not being guaranteed to supply any Elder Influence maps. But if anything happens in that regard, I doubt it'll still have a large impact whatsoever. The best item you will find in this encounter is the double mod Watcher's Eye. The best advice for this one is to sell it unidentified. You can usually sell it for a few exalted orbs and let someone else identify it for you. That way you get a guaranteed cash out, rather than identifying a terrible eye, which is what happens most of the time anyway. Gambling is usually not worth it if you're trying to accrue value. Lastly, the Synthesis unique maps will likely stick around its last league prices or potentially drop slightly at best. I doubt we'll see a major increase in their pricing, however. A slight increase could happen, due to the same reason that Elder Fragments or Shaper Fragments could increase. With Heist being an alternative to maps, there will be less people running maps overall, so there will be a smaller supply of special maps too, unless Heist decides to drop a ton of these as well. But we don't know this to be the case yet. The Cortex, on the other hand, will likely continue to be the most expensive map in the entire game, due to the incredible drops it can provide in the Bottle Faith and Maloney's mechanism. As such, make sure to properly check your Zana store on the regular, as she can sell this map for cheap for you, which will then allow you to either run it, if you're strong enough, or sell it for a pretty penny to other players that might want to try their luck at a Bottled Faith drop. With those currencies and commodities covered, let's move on to our unique item watch list. I'll be listing a few unique items that you might not have considered when thinking about what unique items might become worthwhile in the upcoming Heist League release. I'm purposely trying to avoid the most high visibility uniques, as those don't really need a shout out for you to know that they'll be expensive, because, I mean, they always are. One such example would be the Bottled Faith or the Series Reflection, which, by the way, will likely be even more popular after the curse rework. So, yeah, here we go. First up on the list, the Impulse's Broken Heart. With the addition of new spells, especially lightning-based ones, and changes to older ones, the Impulser becomes a fairly popular option to fix up holes in the clear speed, or just to buff the abilities further. With the Impulser also having a rather low drop rate, any increases to the demand can impact the prices rather heavily, so keep an eye on the prices early on and see how they develop. There are no known ways to target farm this specific body armor either, so if you require this one for your build, make sure to keep an extra keen eye on the development for the prices of it to snipe it at the right time before they rise to too high levels. The Surrender Unique Shield is up next on the list. Despite the heavy nerfs to glancing blows, one of the best shields in the game is still very hard to scoff at. It has always seen quite the large popularity, especially last league, but with the nerfing of glancing blows making it pretty much mandatory to run a recovery on block, it could lead to an increase in demand for this item. Lastly, it started off with a crazy high price point of around 1300 chaos, rapidly dropping down over the course of around 40 days to its end of league price point of around 200 chaos. Whether or not we'll see the same price graphs at last is questionable, but what is not questionable is whether or not the item will still be worth a lot early on. That's a definite yes. To obtain this one, you'll be required to get yourself some Ul Natal Breachstones, as it requires the unique drop, The Anticipation, coupled with one of his blessings to produce. If you get one early on, sell it as soon as possible, because the price drop is huge. Other uniques that could see huge increases in popularity are the Epep's Supremacy and the Epep's Rage. Heist League brings with it a lot of new curse-related things, and as such, also some abilities that deal spell-based chaos damage, many of which scale really well with flat added chaos damage, and these two weapons provide some of the highest added flat chaos damage in the game. Especially abilities that allow the chaos damage to apply elemental ailments, such as the new Hex Blast, benefit tremendously from the flat added chaos damage, as they apply to all three ailments at the same time. Apep's Rage is a rare drop and cannot be farmed specifically, but there are a few divination cards that can drop unique ones, which can help you acquire this one. Apep's Supremacy, on the other hand, is a unique shield that can only be acquired in the incursion areas, specifically in the Altar of Sacrifice, using a Vial of Awakening on an Apep Slumber. Good luck trying to get one of those. Last on the list is the Vixen's Entrapment. Similarly to the previous two mentioned uniques, this one has a high chance to be looked at by a lot of players due to the rework curse and mark mechanics. Depending on whether or not the Doom mechanic is something that a lot of people want to play with, being able to apply an additional curse, and also do so faster thanks to the cast speed increase the gloves provide, seems extremely potent. The prices for these gloves usually hover around the 1 to 3 chaos area, meaning they're extremely cheap throughout the previous leagues. As such, don't bank on them too hard, thinking they'll be the next headhunter or anything, but keep them in mind for your own build, and also just double check on them a few days into the league, to make sure you're not accidentally vendoring a unique glove that might have risen to the 10 or 50 chaos area without you noticing. There are also no known ways to find this unique item. It's a rare bob and can be gotten from the random unique glove divination cards, so the supply should be relatively stable. Outside of those particular uniques, keep a close eye on the uniques related to the Necromancer playstyle, as with any league since 3.6, we'll likely see a huge margin of the player base opt for the easy league start route of simply spamming minions at everything that moves until it's dead. Despite the nerfs, summoners are more than fine and will likely continue to be the most played thing in the league, at least for the first few weeks. And of course, as mentioned earlier, outside of the uniques mentioned right here, there are a ton of uniques that will be extremely worthwhile and popular during the first weeks. However, I won't be listing them all here because otherwise this video will end up being about 3 hours long and my voice can't handle that. Now, moving on to our third segment for this video, the meta predictions. As just mentioned, summoners are likely going to still be extremely popular due to the ease of use and the low cost of entry to become a powerful summoner. The nerfs that came with the 3.12 changes were not substantial at all for the majority of summoning builds, and the quality of life provided by GGG through the auto-summoning on logout is something that the player base has been requesting and looking forward to for a very long time. Additionally, as Tricksters were not patched whatsoever, and ED Contagion also has seen no changes, it is likely that these two will go hand in hand together again as a very popular choice. Personally, I've seen a lot of players be excited for the new spells showcased, especially the Flaming Salvo and the Charged Lance, so you might see a small percentage of players choose the Flaming Salvo for their miners and the Charged Lancers for their Archmage builds. Talking about Archmage, the new gem, Sigil Power, is also going to work extremely well with the overall Archmage playstyle, further increasing its skill ceiling and damage ceiling further. As if it wasn't strong enough already. Am I right? Melee characters are fairly unlikely, outside of the usual Cyclones or early league last rate batteries, of course. As with every melee league, GG has, once again not really addressed the issues that melee faces in the game with Harvest, but rather applied a bunch of band-aids that substantially reduce the quality of life that melee has, while slightly increasing the power. As always. So, yeah, don't be expecting too many players to opt into the two-handed melee playstyle, especially now that the harvest crafting is no longer available and weapons will go back to being incredibly tough to acquire early on. Thanks GGG. Aside from those, we might see a slight increase in bow-based characters as a result of the projectile effect changes coupled with the addition of the new pinpoint support, which is something the bow playstyle has been needing for a while. It goes incredibly well with a vast amount of different bow skills, and could fix some of the single target issues that bow characters usually have. So you might see more of them, but I doubt it's going to be above 5% of the player base opting into their playstyle, to be honest. I would imagine most players will either be playing ED Contagion Tricksters or Summoners, so focus yourselves on those. As for the Atlas prediction, nothing changed. The Xanamotes of this league, however, are absolutely phenomenal. I can't remember a league with a better lineup of choice since their introduction, to be honest. If you're going hard on mapping, and mostly ignoring the heist content, you'll be absolutely elated to have all these options available to you. Two things of note. Firstly, Nemesis and Beyond are back. Orbs of Chance will likely be fairly expensive, as will Ancient Orbs. I usually have Ancient Orbs in the currency section, but they're extremely uninteresting, so I added this disclaimer here instead to keep it short. And, secondly, Fortune Favors the Brave, costing only 3 chaos, will be extremely worthwhile to run. Once you reach the T9 plus map areas, you will likely want to spam this option on every single one of your maps. The value you gain from it this league is absolutely insane and cannot be understated. Each individual use will net you an equivalent of above 6 chaos worth of value, as the options of Xanamods it chooses are not weighted. As such, you have the same chance to get the 16 Chaos Delirium option as you have to get the 4 Chaos Nemesis one, or the 2 Chaos Abyss. Use it, abuse it, love it. Spam the hell out of this option if you're mapping. Like, seriously. Otherwise I'll find you. One thing to keep in mind is that Delve will likely be returning to its former glory as the crafting opus magnum. With Harvest not going cool, fossils are back to being the only real choice for any kind of targeted crafting, and with the mod tag changes making the crafting process a lot more streamlined and easy to access, we might see more players than usual show their interest in the delve in fossil environments. Keep an eye on that. With the meta and atlas analysis and predictions finished, we would have a strategy discussion segment here normally. However, as is tradition with the prediction episodes, I'll instead be giving a long list of early league tips and tricks for you here instead. Many of you that have seen the previous prediction episodes will most likely know the majority of these tips listed here already, but they're important to keep in mind and remember, so I'll go over them again. Firstly, the Chaos Recipe. As per usual, the Chaos Recipe will be your number one moneymaker early on if you're a fast leveler. While it becomes fairly useless over the course of the first few days for most players during the early league times, this recipe alone can make you multiple dozen exalts if done right. Once you reach the Blood Aqueducts, you can start putting together Chaos Recipe with the rare items dropped there. Considering that most Exalted Orbs early on cost only about 20 to 30 Chaos, if you're fast, you can easily get one Exalt for every 10 to 12 hand-ins. Sell your extra maps. Especially during the beginning of a league, people will try to finish their Atlas as fast as possible. Oftentimes they won't mind paying horrendous prices for the one map they require to finish a sector. As such, once you've gained the bonus objective on any given map, just sell the rest of them immediately. The prices will drop drastically for the first few days, so the earlier you sell your axes, the more currency you can make on them. This is especially true for Heist League, as the majority of the league-specific content will not require mapping at all, from what we were told so far, meaning that less players than normal will be trying to rush through the Atlas by buying maps. Resist amulets and rings. Early on, these jewelry items in particular are ridiculously worthwhile to identify and sell, as everyone will require a decent amount of resists right after they're done leveling. They sell like hotcakes and are often worth 20 plus chaos for any decent total resist roll above 100%. Problem solvers. These are good throughout the entire league, but especially early on. Problem solvers are items that have a very high individual stat. For example, 80% cold resistance, or like 100 dexterity. These items are amazing for people that just need to fix a problem in their current build, hence the name. These items can be sold for a really high amount, as there rarely are any with those particular high stats available on the market, and the person buying it has no other option outside of completely reworking their build. As such, these can easily sell for 50 plus chaos in the first week. Invest your chaos. No, seriously. The earlier you start to invest your liquid chaos into guaranteed to rise currencies such as Divine Orbs, Exalted Orbs, Alteration Orbs, the better. Every hour you have chaos sitting in your stash that literally does nothing is wasted passive income you could have gotten by simply converting them into other currency. Or items, for that matter. Flip your maps from Zana's shop. As with the last two leagues, this will still be an incredibly lucrative option, especially with higher tier maps. You only have to open the Zana map inside of the map you're running to reset the shop. You don't actually need to enter it, nor do you need to complete a mission. This makes it extremely easy to cycle through a shop in quick succession, using yellow or even white master missions and maps. Maps from tier 6 to tier 14 are usually all worth flipping in this manner, netting a ton of easy profit per map on average in this fashion. You can flip through a few dozen maps in a matter of minutes. Cluster Jewel Crafting. As with Delirium League, you can expect to make an absolute ton of currency by identifying what cluster jewel nodes are used by players and which ones are in low supply. We'll have to see how hard they are to craft after everything is said and done with the patches, as they got a really strong nerf at the beginning of Harvest. If they are not too hard, they'll likely be a prime crafting target to make some solid currency throughout the league. Just make sure you don't over-invest in them early. Level up some enhanced gems. Placing a couple of green enhanced gems at the offhand weapons in order to level them up as you go through the maps and vaults will likely be a valuable option for once. With the addition of the roughly 900 new gems with alternative quality options, it is likely that at least a few of them will become meta due to the extremely potent quality modifiers. Having a level 4 enhance ready to go once people get to the point of creating builds around them will likely net you a great deal of currency, especially its enhanced base gems are usually dirt cheap to acquire. Keep your gem card as prisms. With the previously mentioned addition of the roughly 900 new gems with alternate quality options and some of them potentially being meta, gem card as prisms are likely going to see one hell of a lot of use this league. As their supply is usually fairly limited, as they're considered a fairly rare currency, the vast increase in demand could lead to a price spike for them. For reference, in case you want to keep an eye on the market, last league, their prices fluctuated between 1.8 to 1 chaos each. I would anticipate that their prices to be around the 2 to 3 chaos mark around the 2-week point. The weekly delve update will of course continue next episode and will likely be more fruitful than it was during harvest, considering that with harvest not going core, delve is back to being our only real crafting choice. And with those last few tips, I'll be ending this prediction chaos report. I hope this video was informative and you learned something from it that you can apply to your own game. Please let me know if I missed anything or you'd have wanted me to talk about anything in specific that I might not have covered. If you want to support the creation of these videos, feel free to check out my Patreon and maybe consider signing up for it. You can also find a link to it in the description down below. Any and all support is highly appreciated. Seriously, even just $1, I'm happy with that. If you have any suggestions or Patreon rewards that you guys would like to see, please let me know on my Discord's feedback channel, down below this video in the comments or on my Twitter. I read all the comments everywhere. So if you want to yell at me, just do so at any of these locations, I'll read it. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell thingy, dislike the video, check me out over on my Twitch. I stream like every day, so just come on over. At least I will be streaming again every day. I had a little bit of a depression problem, but I'm getting there. All right, I'm getting there. Just come on by, tell me I'm ugly or something like that. That's usually what people do, and then peace out again. I don't know. I don't really care. Just stop by, say hello, have fun with the community. You know, it's fun. If you need background noise during the league start, I'll be there. I'll be playing throughout the entire league launch. Like, I'll probably do like a 15-hour stream or something like I usually do. Just leveling through the entire thing, getting like all the league mechanics down, etc, etc. So feel free to stop on by. You can find a link to the stream in my description down below. And yeah, with that, thanks for watching, and keep farming those exals.